Hello everyone, welcome back to A Spot at the Table. My name is Alex, and again, I'm going to remind everybody that as a review video, this is all just my opinion and not to be taken as facts. So, I'm going to start off with something a little bit different than I did with the cipher system. I'm going to start off immediately with the pros and cons list of this, and then I will get a little bit deeper into it and I will explain how the game really plays. It's not a bad game, I just have some gripes with the way it plays. So, first and foremost, the pros and cons list. We're going to start with the pros like I did with the cipher system. So first, my biggest pro for this game has to be the fact that the book is very easy to understand, very easy to read, very short and sweet. You don't have to have any real general experience when it comes to role-playing games to understand what the rules and regulations are for this game. It lays them out very short, sweet, and simple, so you don't have to really worry. One of the things that I don't like about it, but is kind of a plus, is that the game requires no dice or character sheets. Instead, it plays with index cards and cooperative gameplay. The game does encourage a lot of creativity, which is another pro in my opinion, because if you're not creative, this game is going to take a very long time to run. The fourth pro, in my opinion, is the setting that you create using this game can be used over and over again, where everybody knows the histories and everybody knows how the game actually, like how the setting was created. So, in other words, you can use this game one time to create a setting, an entire history for that setting, and then you can play that setting over and over again, creating more and more histories running in different eras that you've already set in stone, which is actually really cool. It's one of the few games I've ever seen where after creating a setting, everything is set in stone, where like the major events have already happened, but you can still play in the setting and learn more about the setting that you helped create. Time isn't a fifth factor or fifth pro in this, has to be the fact that time is not really a factor in this game. In other words, as you're playing, you can jump from years in the past to years in the future just to determine the time periods and eras that the game actually has. And it's all about who's in charge of the lens at that time. I will explain more about that later. One of the things I do like, it's another pro, is that events that have been created by one player cannot be changed by another player. They can be added to, they cannot be physically changed. You cannot stop the event from happening. Once it's in the canon history, it is there. Let's see. Number 7 is a pro that I believe everybody should have a little bit of for every game. And if your players and your game master are not on equivalent terms with this, you wouldn't really... this game takes this very literally, but you wouldn't really have a cohesive game if people are not following the rules set out. But this is, everyone must agree on what is and is not allowed in the game. Very important in Microscope. You actually have a consensus part in the beginning of the game where you're talking about what you want in the game and what you don't want in the game. Everybody goes around the table one time and says either something that they are agreeing to allow in the game or something they disagree to allow in the game. And you go around the table doing that until somebody says, I don't have anything to add or I don't have anything to subtract. And after that, you end that part of the game and you just jump right into actual play. The game can be a single session or multiple sessions, which means you can create a simple setting very easily using this game with multiple people contributing to the history. Or you can sit down repeatedly and create a very, very, very detailed history of a world or a setting using this game's rules very simply by sitting down and talking through the histories with everybody involved. And I think the biggest pro of this game, and something that a lot of games take for granted, is that this game has a very unique play style. You have to sit down and actually focus on how you want to run the game. You can't just sit there and be like, I'm just going to do this as a joke character, because there's no real characters in this game. It is very much a serious game with some silly aspects if you want to add them as events or as periods or as scenes. Again, more into that later. Now I'm going to jump onto the cons list. Now, there were 9 pros that I found for this game, in my opinion, but there are only 8 cons, which is rare. I usually try to find at least 10 things, and I couldn't because of how short the book is and how easy it is to really understand. But my biggest con is this game uses a lot of index cards. And I mean an absolute crap ton of index cards. You will be going through pack after pack if you are playing this game on the regular. After the rules are established, they cannot be changed. That can be a really big problem if you have somebody new invited into the group to help participate in the creation of the setting, because it makes it so they can't really contribute their own ideals, which I wouldn't recommend. Microscope is one of those games, in my opinion, if you are having a new player join, you should start a new game entirely, because otherwise they're going to feel very left out. I'm not going to lie, this is probably my biggest con. Any group without cohesion will fail at playing this game. Any group that, I was going to say literally, but that's not the correct terminology. Any group that has any form of like imbalance or power gamer or like heavy duty, I'm in charge, I'm the king, or even people who don't normally speak up, this game without like good cohesion falls apart very simply, very easily, very fast. But if you're playing in a game with those kinds of people, you're used to having a game fall apart. No offense. Number 4 on the cons list is the fact that even though the rules are simple, they are hard to put into practice, because if you're not used to this style of gameplay or you're not used to setting creation for your own self, it's hard to get into the mindset of creation as a setting. And because a lot of people focus more on one person, and Microscope is about focusing on an entire world or an entire dynasties or an entire civilization's history. So if you are not in that mindset when you are starting this game, you are going to fail miserably as you go through it. Again, I will explain how it's a really simple game to play, and I will explain how to play it. It's just putting the rules into practice without the right mindset is very hard. And that brings me to number 5. The game's mindset is very different from traditional mindsets for gaming. This game very much focuses on the thought of creation and less about character ideals and character roleplay. You can roleplay characters, it's just you're more likely to be playing someone in the background than you are to be playing a main character. And again, I will explain that as I go through. Number 6 is, as the story and setting develop, the amount of index cards becomes harder to handle in confined spaces. You will need a giant amount of room to play this game. I would recommend probably setting out an entire living room sized area so you have these index cards spread all around and you're not confining it so badly that you are unable to sit there and do nothing. Because I'm not going to lie, if you move something incorrectly and it shuffles around the cards, you've screwed up the entire history of the game. I would recommend, if you are doing a Microscope, my own personal recommendation is record the session and have the right kind of program where you can say things like event or it's like a talk-to-text program, because otherwise it's going to be very, very hard to control. No offense to the game creator, but I don't think they were taking in how little space a lot of us have nowadays. I do think that the game is fantastic. I will admit that. I love the premise of this game. Number 7 is playing multiple characters in a scene may confuse newer players. And this is just mainly a gripe I have with a lot of games is they don't really take into account that newer players are not used to role playing. So this is one of those games though where you will be playing upwards of anywhere from 1 to 4 to 5 characters in a scene. You'll have one main character followed by 2 to maybe 4 secondary characters that you are playing. And that's, again, only up to who's playing at the time, who wants to add it in. But that's not the point. If you're not used to playing multiple characters, you're not used to playing multiple characters. And my last gripe with this game is the game can be ruined with a single bad player. And by that I mean anyone who has the mindset of, I just want to screw up everything, I don't want to actually take this seriously, it can take the game to an umpteenth level of degree. And like you could take the game for hours and destroy everything everyone has put in by just saying, not only do you not want to play anymore, but you're going to screw with everyone's decisions. Yes, things that are set in stone are set in stone, but if you set an event afterwards that completely destroys all the hard work of everybody else, which you can do in this game, but if you do it, it ruins the fun for a lot of people. It can actually be detrimental to the game instead of being progressive to the game, and I don't really like that. Again, my biggest one is if you're not a cohesive group, you're not going to be able to play this game. Now, I've talked for 11 minutes, almost 12, about my pros and cons. So I'm going to get actually into the game now. So first and foremost, this is not a traditional tabletop role-playing game. This is a Fractal game, which has many different things, but you have the play rules here, which are very nice. It goes very step by step, so it's very easy to understand. It has examples in the beginning of the book on what kind of games you're playing and how to play it. It tells you what you need to play and how to use the book, which are two very important things for a game. Now we're going to start here. This is what I mean by the cohesiveness of a game. So you start with a big picture, what you want the game to really start with and be. And then from there, you go over here and you take bookend histories. You have the beginning and the end of whatever your setting is going to be and how they each begin and or end. Now, you don't want to leave any questions. You don't want to make if-then statements. You want to make a statement. You want to leave it closed. You do not want it to end like with, and what happens after this, because that's not how this game is really played. You make a this happens statement. And then on here, you'll see where it says palette, add or ban ingredients. From there is where I mean when I said that players have to be on the same page and they must agree on what can be and cannot be added into the game. Very good examples are choosing to not have wizards in a sci-fi game, or choosing to have wizards in a fantasy game. Having these elements actually either is detrimental and or either detrimental to the setting that you're trying to create, or it is a staple for the setting you're trying to create. It does say, like, don't make it too obvious things that should be outright banned, like things like, how to put it, things akin to wizards being always in a fantasy setting. That's something that you shouldn't have to put in play, but just in case somebody is trying to create a fantasy setting without wizards, you can ban wizards from being in the fantasy setting. Now, I'm going to go in it very fast on this, but the first pass. This is where you add a period or an event to a game. That's how the game is really played. You no longer, once you hit this step, you are no longer in group discussion mode. You are back to single player decision making mode. Very simple, very easy. We're going to go right through here, right into the playing the game section, and we will talk about overview of play. The person who is in charge at the time is called a lens. That lens picks a focus to focus on, and that'll be what you are talking about during that event or that scene. The lens, during that entire turn, and a turn is until it gets back to the lens, going around the table. Once it gets back to the lens, it switches to a new lens. But during that entire time, you are on that focus. If you are playing, and say we were playing a game where I wanted to do a fantasy game, I'm not going to go very far into details, but the premise is the Dark Lord rises is the end goal, like is the end of the game. Dark Lord destroys the world is the end of the period. And the beginning of the period is the heroes rise to fight the Dark Lord. I could do something along the lines of heroes meet the heroes create an event. Heroes meet the fairies to gain their weapons. And then that entire part of that history is, like, the entire focus of that game is focusing down on that part of history and being like, all right, so how did they meet the fairies? Who did this? Who did that? The questions are then answered by each player in turn. You don't actually have to say the questions, but each player creates either a period, a event, or a scene. And again, these are further down the line things, but it's called making history. That's what the entire group of the game is. So as you can tell down here, period cards are upright, event cards are horizontal, and then scene cards are also upright. Scene cards go under event cards, and event cards play down from period cards. The dark circle and light circle make sense because in this game, when you are creating a history, you are choosing either whether the tone is light or the tone is dark. I like creating dark events because I'm vicious, but that's not the point. The point is how the players at the time create, like the player who's involved at the time, whether he creates a light or dark tone. It's up to him, not up to everybody else. It's up to him to create that part of history. Types of histories are periods, which can span anywhere from decades to centuries and can be vast spans of time. Events, which are pieces of things that happen inside of periods. Events can span anywhere from a few years to a few days to a few hours. Events are very important because events tell a part of the story that happened during that period. While if you go all the way through, you get to scenes. And scenes are a lot more like the actual role-playing aspect of this game. Instead of sitting down and taking the time to look at each individual piece of the puzzle, at the beginning of a scene, when someone wants to create a scene, he poses a question. You all pick. He then places characters that must be played in the scene, and then characters that are banned from being played in the scene. And then everybody goes around the table and chooses which character they want to play. And then you role play the scene together, including things like my thought statements, including, I'm going to skip past all this because I just talked about it, but you can reveal the thoughts of the character, you can stay in the background as the character, or you can play the time as the character. Now, time is very, very different than playing a normal character. Time is more along the lines of how to put stressors on a situation. You can only play time if it makes sense. I wouldn't recommend playing time every time because it doesn't work. But we'll get into the situational modifiers into playing scenes. When you are playing a character in a scene, you can't just answer the question outright. That's not fair to everybody else. You have to describe thoughts. You have to describe actions. You have to describe what you perceive to be true. That way you help shape the world. It's less about answering the question right off the bat and more about creating more minor histories or minor thought processes that are known to your characters but not to you. And it allows you to have a little bit more creative freedom when you're creating these things. Truth and hearsay is about what does the character know versus what does the character think. The character might think that someone's coming to save them when in reality another character knows everybody in that who is supposed to be coming to save them is gone. So, you don't really have to worry about that, but it's just a point. This is what I meant by playing multiple characters. You can play up to like 5 secondary characters, and it can get convoluted fast if you're not knowing what you're doing. Now, if you are playing a main character and a secondary character does something to you, it is up to the main character to decide, up to the player of the main character to decide what actually happens. At the same time, a main character can attempt to do something to another main character, and then it is up to the player playing the main character that's having something done to them to decide what actually happens. You can actually use the push model in creative conflict. Pushing makes it so, say you are saying what your character is thinking, and another player thinks, I have a better thing for that character to think in this situation. He can propose his thoughts forward, and then everybody goes around the table and gets to propose their own thoughts, and then there's a vote. At the end, the vote is what happens, but the player playing the character who got pushed still gets to decide the outcome of the situation. He's not stuck. He still gets to decide the outcome. That's like the main point. But he's not stuck in the situation. Now, starting with a push, describing things no one can see. We'll get to I'll explain those relatively quickly. Starting with a push just describes how you start a push. Pushing to describe things that no one can see. Very, very fantastic little thing right here is as everyone falls into cryo sleep, an indicator light on the control panel starts winking. It is a sensor alert showing that some foreign organism is aboard the ship. The problem is everybody is asleep. No one can perceive this. So you have to push to describe it without, and if there's no one who has a better story to add to that, it happens. If someone has a better story and the vote is for that part of the story, then that's what happens. Now, you already know that clause. Very important. It makes it so you can't contradict what's already been played. In other words, if your character would know something that you as a player are trying to ignore from the history, your character can't ignore that because he knows that as a fact. Very important. It makes it so you can't contradict the histories. You might be able to contradict the histories with a thought, but you can't contradict the histories with a fact. Now, this is just examples of play. Now, one of the things you can do for scenes instead of having people role play them out is dictating a scene. And this is where you sit down and you describe a scene to everybody. Instead of posing a question, well, you state the question still, but you decide where to put the scene in the history and review what we already know, plus you narrate what happens to answer the question. That way people don't have to sit there and role play the scene. It just happens. At the end of every scene, everybody discusses what happens and decide what the scene's tone is. If you don't have an opinion, you can just stay silent, but majority vote wins. Now, legacies are important. Every legacy is very important. So, making a legacy to identify things you are thinking of interesting or want to keep in the spotlight. Legacies are explored during a special phase of play between one focus and the next. Legacies are kind of cool. It allows you to keep something in the focus of the group without having to lose the whole gameplay focusing on it. That's why it's really cool that they added that in. You can choose a new legacy later, or you can explore a legacy later. Styles of play, getting into the Microscope mindset. This is actually really good if you read this. It helps you get into the mindset for the play. And then this is an example of the Doom of the Gods in play. See what I mean by it's very, here you go. It can get messy and convoluted. But then we get into this section, discussions and advice. The ending of the game is really cool because it allows you to store your histories. I again recommend a text-to-speech program and then somebody going through and archiving the text-to-speech in a way that makes it more or less understandable in the this happened, then this happened, then this happened sense. The period separated into events and events separated into scenes. Because if you do it the way the game is discussing, it can get very convoluted very, very fast. But, don't get me wrong, still like the game. I'm not going to go past here, because that's all that I really have for the core mechanics. And I hope you guys have enjoyed the look at Microscope. And we can, if you have any comments, questions, or concerns about the game, please do message me, and I will let you know in the comments what I think. Thank you, and have a great night. Bye, guys.